Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. We welcome you to today's webinar hosted by Maarga Systems, along with Scott, where we are discussing double your business agility using SharePoint Online. And just a quick introductions. I'm Chirag Barhate. I'm the CTO here at Maarga Systems, and as part of my role, I oversee the technology and solutioning aspects of our business. And joining me in this webinar today is Gopi, who is our Chief SharePoint Architect, who would be driving bulk of today's presentation. So, an interesting fact that I just noticed about today's demography, joining us are the you attendees in today's webinar from 23 countries, roughly 60% from North America, 15% from Europe, and 25% from the rest of the continent. So we have quite a diverse audience. So we would try to keep it relevant for everybody. A quick introduction to Maarga Systems, who we are. We are a technology partner and a boutique consultancy firm who helps large global enterprises and in the three primary areas of efficient business processes, seamless collaboration, and digital transformation. So these are the three key verticals that we work with for our clients, and all of our services are mainly delivered as part of these five categories, which is automation of business processes and workflows, migration of platforms from one technology stack to another, collaboration using different platforms that are available, digital transformation of the organization, as well as managing and maintaining a whole set of applications, infrastructure, and a lot of systems that a large enterprises needs on a day-to-day basis. So that's what we do, and we are a partner with both IBM, a premier partner, and with Microsoft. So we work across the spectrum of products that both these providers have in the market. So quickly jumping to the agenda that we have outlined for today's webinar, we would do a quick introduction for people who are aware but not very well versed with the features of SharePoint. We'll just do a quick walkthrough of what are the key features and what are the key use cases that we have seen our clients and some of the larger enterprises worldwide use SharePoint Online for. Then we will jump into a specific case study that we have seen and implemented for our enterprise. And with the help of that case study, we would try to outline what are the key elements of SharePoint that we would use to make your business processes more agile, more dynamic. And towards the end of the sessions, we will also cover some of the best practices that we have gathered. Gopi would share from his experience. And we would also talk about how do you empower the IT teams in our organization, depending on what function or role you perform in your organization. How do you empower yourself to make the best use of SharePoint Online? So that's the main agenda topic for today. And one interesting definition of business agility or business agility in the business context, as Wikipedia quotes it, is the ability of an organization to rapidly adapt to market and environment changes in a productive and cost-effective manner. So the two words here are important are productive and cost-effective manner. And we believe that SharePoint as a platform in a large organization is in the ideal position, is the primary vehicle with which you can demonstrate this agility in your organization. So with that introduction, we would also like to understand our audience a little bit better. So I would request Scott to run our first poll where we would try to understand whom we are talking to today, and we'll try to keep our discussion relevant as far as possible.
Okay, brilliant. So the poll is up on your screens now. So we just want to understand the audience. So if you'll just kind of indicate what is your role in your organization. Are you a business analyst? Are you in IT management? Are you a software developer? Or are you on a team that uses SharePoint? Or do you have another type of role? So we already have 70% of us have voted. This is great. Everybody's awake and ready to go. We do appreciate this feedback, and it will certainly help the presenters focus a little bit the message a little bit more towards where we're at in terms of the audience. So we have a little over 80% of us have voted. Give us about 3 more seconds, and then I will share the results. And that way you'll know who's on the webinar as well. Okay, so it looks like 55% of the attendees are business analysts, 17% in IT management, 2% are software developers, 13% are on a team using SharePoint, and 13% have another type of role. So it looks like the majority are analysts in management.
Interesting. Thanks, Scott, for running that. I think this helps us a lot, and we would try to stay in the course in this webinar, and we would talk about SharePoint and the technical aspects of it, but we will reserve the deep dive code level details for maybe a later session. So that definitely should help today's audience. So with that, I would like to hand over to Gopi. Scott, if you can make Gopi the presenter to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Okay, Gopi, I've changed the presentation over to you. You should be able to share your screen now.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, can you look at my screen? Like,
yeah, we can see your screen. You're ready to go.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, hey all, my name is Gopi, and as my colleague Chirag has introduced, I have been working in IT for the past 15 years and predominantly working in SharePoint environment for the past 7 years. That is my little introduction, and before we get further into this webinar details, I just wanted to bring up, like, as we all know, I mean, I just want to create an awareness about the SharePoint Online. SharePoint Online can now be called as a browser-based online collaboration and document management software solution. It not only lets us build sites from different site templates available, but it also helps us in organizing the content in the right way and manage efficiently through the permissions which are available through the SharePoint, which can be assigned to a SharePoint group. I'm amazed with the search engine capabilities in SharePoint Online, where the SharePoint Online lets you discover not only the files, but also now searches the contents of the file, where you search for a word, and whether it's a file or the content is present in a file, your results are out there. Now the documents can be shared between employees and also external users, provided we enable the external users access at the tenant level. Finally, definitely SharePoint helps us in staying connected, and it brings our employees and businesses resources together and stay connected. Now, as we have given an introduction to SharePoint Online, I would like to go to the next slide to see some of the prominent key features where SharePoint helps us. So when we look at the prominent features, it has the ability for file sharing, as I've told you, between the employees and external users. This is very handy where as an organization we might have some external users like vendors and other kind of users where we wanted to share those documents. So those can be shared now, and we can automate the business processes through workflows using the built-in workflows, or we can write our custom workflows. And the sites, the team sites or communication sites, can now be created with a single click. And there is also a provision of taking advantage of all the modern experiences of the custom list document library, and customize the search results for better user experience. One of the new feature, and it has been there, but which I have recently looked a lot into it, is the DLP, where the data loss prevention. It definitely helps us, like how we can protect our data and also prevent the loss of data within our organization, or beyond that. Now, as we looked at what SharePoint can offer, I just wanted to go through some of the common most used case scenarios where SharePoint Online has been where it has been implemented on SharePoint Online. So let us move on to the next slide. And as we go through the use cases, I have seen instances where it has been used as an invoice management tool, and also for expense reimbursement. And most of the SharePoint features which are commonly used for implementing the above are by customizing your lists or the views for restricting the access and having custom pages, and workflows like to automate your business processes, say for approvals or other categories, and also have custom themes and the navigation for browsing through the site. And please remember that some of these apps are some of these use cases are turned into apps or add-ins, and some of them have been deployed as sites. And we would be going through the through three use cases on the next slide. And we will do a case study of resource request system where we have enabled this for where we have deployed for one of our enterprise, and which was migrated from Lotus Notes. Before we get into that, I just wanted to say, let us cover three use cases, being the resource request management, and the other one is the how can we use SharePoint Online site as a project requirements management system, and an invoice management system. So now when we move on to the next slide, I would like to talk about what exactly the resource request system does is, the application does is, it is one of the business critical application which has been migrated from Lotus Notes to SharePoint Online for one of our clients. The application is a high volume based application used by all employees over the world, and it caters to the need of submitting a resource request by employees. And the resource request, it can be a full-time employee or a consultant or a contractor. um, After the request is submitted, it goes through several multi-level approvals based on the type of position. Say we have a different process for a full-time employee when compared with a consultant or contractor. This application is also has some data which has been migrated to other systems like SAP, where by calling REST APIs. So the application is it's responsive, and it was targeted for workstations, mobile devices using Bootstrap. And this was a little primitive. I know we do have SharePoint framework now, where we can do all our client-side development using the SharePoint framework, which helps us get away from the Bootstrap. So I would like to go on to the next slide, which basically talks about the flow, like how this request can be submitted. So we will be looking at the live system which has been deployed in our tenant. But before we get into that, we have the users come and submit a new request, or edit an existing request. And as soon as that is done, a workflow is triggered when a new item is created, and a task is created so that it goes to the next level. Now the next level is a group in SharePoint, which is which has certain restricted permissions. And it is primarily the IS controlling approval team, which basically approves or denies the request. As you can see through the flow, it is all configured through custom workflow. And as soon as the request gets approved, it gets to the next stage, which is the service team, LST service team. So at this level, it goes for the second level of approval. If we can see from the flow diagram, we can certainly see, there is a separate process for a full-time employee versus a consultant or contractor, and also budget is also involved with this. Any full-time employee or any consultant or contractor position higher than 5,000 euros per month has to go through another approval, and that would has to get an approval from the CIO. So as you can see on the diagram, any request which is less than 5,000 euros and a consultant or a contractor, this position can be approved at the LST service team level, and the application gets and the request gets approved right there, and the user gets notified about the approval process. So now when we look at the CIO level, the request can either be approved and approved for a consultant or contractor, or if it is a full time, it has to flow through the CEO for approval. So there are some scenarios where consultant and contractors fall beyond the scope of CIO. So these cases are stored as special cases, and a trigger is alerted, and workflow is alerted in such cases to be triggered to the CIO. In general, for a normal full-time position, it has to get an approval from CIO for sure. So, so this is the overall flow diagram which has been implemented at one of our client location, and I would like to just show this on one of the on the tenant, like how this application looks. Please let me know if you guys can look at my screen. Yeah. Yeah, I hope you guys can look at the screen, at a SharePoint screen with a default homepage having an options for.
Yeah, we can see that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as we come here, as you can see under the navigation, we have a request for a new full-time employee request. So let me demonstrate and submit a request as an end user to see what exactly happens, as I do that. So when I submit a request for a full-time employee, I can basically submit a position for a software developer, and we have some information which is already being retrieved using the REST APIs for the profile information, like for the person logged in. And I can say the location being Chennai, and the preferred name can be myself. I would say, like the preferred person name Gopi. And as you can see, this status is new and the request type is new, and the expected start date I would just key in as 1st of Feb, and I would go to the expected end date, and I would just pick a month, say March 1st. I know it is very small, but just for testing purposes. And if we look at this tab, we have a scenario where we can pre-populate the other information which are associated with the cost center. Say I have picked up a DCU 1 lakh as a cost center, and the relevant information populates for this specific request. As you can see, the DCU name and activity center, as soon as an item is changed, we have basically called a REST API, which goes and grabs the additional dependent information. Now I would list this position as which is less than 3,000 euros, and I would say, like to develop applications on SharePoint Online. And this is the information which can be captured, and additional we also do have tabs, like if an additional information can be attached, that can be done. And we can also restrict the access level on this document, and the audit trail will be also captured as we progress through this submission. Now when I submit this request, you would basically see that a request has been submitted successfully. So I just wanted to show as we get redirected to the home page, you can definitely see here that a position has been submitted for a software developer. And as a person, somebody who belongs to the controlling approval, I would like to show the other screen say this one right here, say like when Mark logs in, like how the screen looks. So this is the screen when Mark, who being a part of the controlling approval group, as soon as as soon as he looks at the screen, yeah, he basically a task has been assigned to him, and as you can see when I open up the position, it basically asks for it basically lists out the details, and also gives an option to either approve or reject the position. So now let us just go back to the previous screen where I was presenting. Say for instance, when we look at the say for instance when we look at the position, you should be able to see it has a lot of other data associated, and when the position lists out other details, you should notice that the audit trail has information that somebody has initiated this process. Now jumping back to our PowerPoint slides. So this is all which I wanted to show, and how the system was built is what SharePoint features were used was a list was customized with document libraries being customized, and there were several workflows which have been written. And since modern UI was not readily available, and also the SharePoint framework is still in beta stage, we went ahead and started using the Bootstrap for making this application responsive. Yeah. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So application can be responsive, and apart from that, we also used a third-party plugin called Muhimbi PDF, where it lets you convert your PDF. It lets you convert your application as a PDF document, and after approval, and it can be stored in a destination library wherever we wanted to store it. So when we talk about the next system, it is an invoice management system, where if we look at the diagram, we definitely have certain cases where the user can log in, log out, change their profiles or change the passwords. While implementing the invoice management systems, we were basically using the lists, the document libraries, and few parts of the application has been written using workflows in order to automate business processes. Say for instance, an invoice is less than the budgeted amount. So in such a case, we didn't want somebody manually going and approving this request. So what we have basically done is we have come up with a workflow which triggers as soon as the amount is less, as soon as the item is modified, and if the amount is within the budget, the invoice gets auto approved. Now after going through this, there is another use case which is very useful, and what I have noticed is, even though we have Microsoft project where it has the ability to integrate with SharePoint Online with a click of a button, where the whole your Microsoft project plan, like the .mpp, can be used for like tracking resources, or assigning tasks to resources. Even though it can be integrated into your SharePoint Online, the one of the need where we had to implement it as a custom application was the client wanted to decommission Microsoft project server, and at the same time they wanted to develop this in SharePoint Online because of licensing issues. So in such a scenario, we had to make sure the application is responsive, and task list was used for assigning tasks, and also a report was also being generated for for the higher management. So most of the things what have been used was lists, where it allows you to create the smart requirements that can be manipulated, analyzed, and organized according to the stakeholders needs. And lookups were created where it helps in traceability, and also ensures that all the requirements are valid. And when it comes to views, you can always make sure specific views are created so that the right people would see the right things. And while doing this, we also had to come up with some workflows to automate to automate this process. So when they were provided with business default acceptable values. Now, as we have gone through the 3 use cases, can I request, hey Scott, can you please bring up the next poll, please?
Okay, I'll bring up the next poll. Be on your screen. So, how do you use SharePoint Online in your organization? Do you use it for document management and intranets? Are you using it for workflows and business applications? Or are you at the stage of just planning to use SharePoint Online, or you are not yet using SharePoint Online solutions? All right, so over 60% of us have voted. This is great. We'll get the results up on the screen in just a moment. Still have votes coming in. All right, 2 more seconds. Give you a chance to grab that mouse and participate in the poll. All right, I'm going to share the results. So we're at 56% of the attendees use SharePoint Online for document management and intranets. 12% use it for workflows and business applications. 15% of the audience is just starting to plan their SharePoint Online experiences and applications, and then 17% of us are not using SharePoint solutions at this moment. Okay. Back to your slides.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And as expected, yes, I definitely feel like most of the use cases which have been used for SharePoint Online as a document management system. And before I conclude, and I just want to go to the next slide, where where we talk about the best practices to develop apps quickly. Now, when I look at the first thing, I would definitely wanted to know wanted to know the product, what can SharePoint offer us. And also, apart from organization, I would also need to know how are the other dependencies, the Exchange or the Active Directories are organized. The only reason I bring up this point is while creating an application, we have noticed that we were creating duplicate SharePoint groups in the SharePoint environment when this security groups were already present in Active Directory. Now, we could have applied permissions based on the Active Directory rather than taking the step of creating the SharePoint groups in the environment. And that is what I feel like we need to understand what can SharePoint offer. And a good way is keeping a look at the roadmap to see what Microsoft is coming up, and what are all the replacements which are happening. And also make sure the necessary groups, like on a business case, maybe only the marketing team has to look at certain slides, certain sites. So in such scenarios, it is obviously better to trust on the Active Directory security group for permissions, since the feed happens every night most of the time, and I've seen instances where they sync up for every 6 hours too. And we at Maarga are very much experienced at setting up the SharePoint Online SharePoint environments, let it be on premise or in cloud, or setting up your SharePoint Online tenant. And we'll be also conducting webinars in future which will run around which will run around these topics. And also, another interesting thing, while I still talk about the SharePoint environment and organization, is I've seen when it comes to developing an application, in the other traditional world, like beyond the cloud, we have seen instances where our dev environment is separate with a set of servers when compared with a set of servers for dev and QA and production, and and with the proper access controls placed. Now, when you try to implement this in SharePoint Online, I don't think, since everything is tenant based, I don't think you could create a site for uh, uh, development. You could create the same site for QA, and you could create the same site for production. In such scenarios, I personally believe that having a tenant dedicated for dev, QA, and production with the proper access controls in place would definitely differentiate between your environments and make sure, like the person whoever has access in production cannot access dev, and vice versa. So I've seen instances where you can have your own tenant for dev or QA or production to keep everything at right of the place. And the second one, what I mostly wanted to talk is about the using most of the out of the box features. The only reason why I believe at this stage in SharePoint Online to use out of the box features is they are consistently changing or upgrading the SharePoint Online environment, where if you have customized web parts which are touching the SharePoint elements, obviously your site is going to break. If you're touching some of the SharePoint elements like the CSS classes or the div elements. So it is always better to use most of the out of the box features, OOB features. And when we look at the SharePoint framework, and now we have the SharePoint framework which is in beta stage, but we have done some abundant applications, and we have created some client-side web parts, which is very good to know that these are responsive, and you don't need to have bootstraps, and they are easy to, and they easily integrate with the SharePoint data. And the best thing is you don't need a Microsoft product to develop your client-side web parts now. It is like we have the Visual Studio Code where it is an open source editor. You can also use Atom and other products for developing your client-side web parts. And the next point, what I would feel is, like you should be able to scale your environment as we are in cloud and tenant based. And there might be instances where we get a requirement saying, like please go ahead and clone the dev environment again for performance testing. In such a scenario, we just have to make sure, like adequate documentation is there, and make use of the PowerShell scripts to automate the environment, and to scale the environment as soon as possible with quick turnaround times. And the last but not the least, we have used the analytics frameworks to analyze how the web parts are being rendered for different devices. And also we consistently look for feedbacks uh, to look at any possible upgrades the web parts have to be done, or any possible upgrades. And these can be captured by creating a survey which already exists in your SharePoint site. Just create a survey, and you can definitely take additional feedback to come up with better web parts with a good user experience. And I would like to conclude with this slide, and I would ask Chirag to take over. Hey Chirag, can you please take over?
Yeah, thanks, Gopi. Can you move to the next slide? Yeah. So what Gopi talked till now was about how we can make business processes or applications happen on SharePoint Online for your business. I wanted to, from the poll that we ran, it was interesting to see that uh, a bulk of our audience today, or it reflects the general trend in the market also, are using SharePoint and SharePoint Online for primarily document management and document sharing. Uh, in reality, it's a beast of a platform, and there are so many things that it can do, but this is a classic case where an organization invests in a platform, but um, at various stages it is confused as to how to take it forward. We work with typically large organizations, uh, dispersed across the globe, 50 to 60,000 employees. And a pattern that emerges is that when, as a IT organization, as a CIO, if you're investing a huge amount of money in having all your users come onto this platform, the immediate next thought is that how best I can use this platform, or how best I can derive the ROI from this platform. And that's where uh, there is an increased push to bring whatever you can onto this platform. And as a business head or as a business analyst, you start thinking that what are my processes that I can bring onto this platform in the easiest possible way. In fact, we have seen projects where clients have asked us to migrate some of their legacy platforms, legacy document management systems, for which they were separately paying licensing and server cost and things like that, and move the entire platform as such to be rebuilt in SharePoint Online, for which they are already invested in, and already spending a lot of effort and energy around support, maintenance, and things like that. So that's the general trend. This also helps the global and regional structure, where that a lot of uh, non-IT organizations, the manufacturing organizations of the world have, where there is a central control from IT, but there is also a lot of decentralized citizen development that is happening at the regional levels, and they need to have enough autonomy to be able to drive their business and drive their business cases. And that's where the platform comes in picture. So if you see the two viewpoints that you have on the slide, and how do you message these two viewpoints in a firm? On one side, we have the business unit heads or business heads who have a specific case that they need to run their business, and they can choose any platform, or they can even choose a off-the-shelf SaaS product to do that work, whether it is a CRM, whether it's an internal process. But what helps if they bring this onto SharePoint Online is that they can leverage the security, the user lifecycle management, the training, probably the L1, L2, and service desk support. All of that is taken care of either in the central IT area, or in the organization as a whole. So you can focus on getting your application or the business process being built in days rather than months, what would be traditionally the case, by leveraging all the platform's functionalities. Plus, it would be digital ready. It would be a web and mobile compatible application. So if you are a regional team who wants a new application for their sales force, which is on the ground, it might be just 300 users, but you can spin off a application which works for their business case and still follows all the standards of an enterprise ready SaaS application, mobile enabled, all of the things that you typically expect, but you believe it takes a lot of time to achieve. So that's the business head point of view. But now, if we look at the CIO, CTO, and central IT, I think it's a massive boost to the IT's image if they can be responsive and they can manage the needs of the organization, whether it is granular control on access and security, but at the same time being able to change or allow the regions and allow their departments to be able to do their work effectively onto the platform. So in this case, then IT, there is not just the department which is driving a particular platform, but there is a pull that comes from other areas of the organization, which is definitely helpful for CIO organization. So uh, from a business standpoint, there are a lot of benefits of bringing your existing as well as some of the offline processes, business processes, onto a platform like SharePoint Online if you are already invested into it. So that's what we have seen from our engagement. One of the challenge, although I spoke a lot about the benefits, there are some amount of challenges also. One which Gopi briefly touched upon is that this is a constantly evolving platform. Microsoft releases features and updates, and they are immediately applied to the platform. So managing change in the organization, which was primarily a IT prerogative traditionally, becomes a headache for IT. We call this as evergreen IT. It's an industry's term, and that is the most difficult challenge in this case. Where how do you maintain everything in the face of change? So your application should work. Your users should not suddenly get a prompt which they are unaware of. So all of that still remains a challenge and needs to be managed. But that definitely is not not a big roadblock to go over. So with that thought, I think I would like to conclude what we had to present. But I wanted to take a minute of your time to just say that we do invest some time and effort in creating these webinars and bringing to you. We love talking to our audience, and we love to hear feedback on what you would like to hear from us in the future. So Gopi, if you can move to the next slide. We wanted to have a quick feedback from you guys. You would have a link to the feedback in the chat window, and there are some of the topics that we have in our pipeline, like integration of voice powered assistant like Alexa, or chatbot based solution with Slack, and its integration with SharePoint Online in a business context. So we have live demos of certain cases that we have developed, and we would like to bring in the form of a webinar to you next. Also, there is ideas around a boot camp to help teams do citizen development, which is rapid application development using SharePoint Online with minimal knowledge, or at least very basic knowledge of coding. So these are some of the topics. If you want to hear more from us on other topics, we would be happy to take that feedback as well. So please do contribute a minute of your time to give us this valuable feedback. And while you're doing that, you can also paste your questions in the chat window. Me and Gopi are here, so we will try to answer any questions that you might have. I think we're still doing good on time. So I would give you a minute to give the feedback as well as post any questions. And thank you all for listening to us. So Scott, if you can help us with the questions, if there are any in the queue.
Hey, this is Nattu here. I've shared the feedback form link in the chat section of your GoToWebinar panel. I hope everyone is able to see that. Can someone confirm back on chat? Yep.
I see it there, so it's fine.
Okay.
Just as a reminder, everybody, open up your GoToWebinar control panel. If you go to the chat area, there'll be a link there for that feedback form, and that way you can help direct the next topic. So, or at least influence what the next topic will be. So that would be to your benefit. And then we do have a couple of questions lined up and ready to go. So I think while we're giving everyone a chance to fill out that form, I'll go with the first question here. So first question is, what are the advantages of the SharePoint framework?
Okay, I'll let Gopi answer that.
Yeah, sure. I will take that. See, the advantages with what we are basically seeing with, as you know, even Chirag and myself, we have told, like with the consistent changes or introduction of new features or upgrading existing features is certainly causing an issue, with the environment. So with the SharePoint framework, you can build responsive client-side web parts which are more robust and will cater to any device which has been used to access it. So it is mostly like one piece of code, and it targets your iPads, it targets your mobiles, it targets your desktops for different resolutions. And then another added benefit, what I personally feel is, we can now create all these client-side web parts using open source tools. Say for instance, Visual Studio Code, which is the most prominently used tool for users who have experience with .NET, but there are also Atom and other tools where you can use these tools for developing these client-side web parts. So I would say they are more responsive. These can be built against open source, and it is an open source tools for building these web parts, and they are more stable when compared with the other classic experience. And just wanted to remind, like, all this SharePoint framework, they can be targeted to classic or the modern experience, and your web part renders perfect. I mean, it renders fine with no issues.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Next question is how should we decide if we need to use the SharePoint framework?
See, I'll take that question, Scott. Gopi here. So yeah, I mean, so basically, as of now, Microsoft is giving us an option for picking, if you want classic experience or the modern experience. But eventually, when they switch on to modern experience, that is the only one way where we develop these web parts. So once classic experience goes away, you won't be having some web parts like the content editor web parts where you can add HTML tags, or you can have a piece of JavaScript embedded, or a script editor web parts. All these web parts will be gone once Microsoft makes like all these sites to be using modern experience. So it is going to be mandatory, maybe not right now, but I certainly see in future that is coming. Like, you have to learn SharePoint framework in order to create client-side web parts. Since we are in cloud and tenant based, and obviously there's no server side, there is no server object model allowed. So it would be more realistic to start thinking about SharePoint framework and build web parts.
Okay, brilliant. All right. We did get some early feedback here through the question and answer section that a couple of them have both said that either topic would be excellent. They would appreciate either one. So we'll see how the feedback form comes through, and we'll go from there. So I think we're coming up here. Last call for questions here. So I think we might have one more in the queue here, but if you do have a question, now is the time to ask. You've got both Chirag and Gopi here available for you. All right, here is the next question. What do you recommend to push orgs that implement SPO, but just throw it out there without any directions? This particular person says, I often see executives at clients do this, then they themselves continue in the 1999 IT land with desktop Outlook and PPT. So I guess John's question is, hey, what do you recommend here to really push organizations to move to the SPO and not stay in in the past?
It's a very interesting question. So let me try to answer that. So you're right. I think that's the classic case of executive being influenced, goes to a conference, gets influenced by a platform, mandates it in the organization, and then doesn't see it through. But that's not the only case. There are organizations which have also done it with the best intention, but then they simply could not cope with the sheer amount of features that the platform has. And once you open it up, it is very difficult to then bring things back under control. So governance and policy making becomes a big concern. I think the best suggestion is to roll it out in phases, not just in a controlled fashion for the organization, but also in a controlled fashion in terms of the features. So I've seen organizations which initially try to roll out only those features which they think they can control. They would restrict, let's say, a group creation to only a certain section of IT who does it on a request and a demand model. They do not release Microsoft Teams, for example, right away, because we are still I still feel that organizations are trying to understand what a Microsoft Teams does to the whole scenario of Office 365 and SharePoint Online. It changes the paradigm to a great extent. Um, so the idea is to try to do it in a controlled fashion, which allows you to not lose that control on the platform and still stay relevant. Uh, the second thing is the stickiness of the platform, which is you need to bring the relevant business processes which are relevant for your day-to-day work, for which you go to the 1999 system, which is still running on a mainframe or still running on the Lotus Notes-based application. Unless that gets brought into this platform, the stickiness doesn't improve, and even the CIO or the executive would not have a drive to come to the platform and get their work done. So we typically do adoption engagement with organizations, which is a long-standing engagement where we handhold them through this journey, but they do the bulk of the work, which is bringing all of their organization's processes, whether it's offline or traditional, onto the platform. And the sooner you do that, the better it is for your organization to stay on track.
Okay, brilliant, perfect. Now, just as a follow-up to that, you did mention some type of adoption process. Is that something a process that Maarga offers, or is there a some type of adoption system out there that you recommend? So in some cases, I see adoption badges where people earn badges if they do certain things.
Right. I think the adoption badges, we classify that as gamification. That is only one element of the whole adoption framework. So we developed a custom adoption framework within Maarga, which goes through 5 different phases and has several sub-elements to it. It is a combination of technical and non-technical framework where we go right from brainstorming and strategizing and understanding the org's cultural fit, but we then also go to the grassroots level of having a collaboration booth where a person is sitting into a booth ready to answer your questions when you roll out a feature, right? So it's a combination of a lot of online and offline activities, and it is run as a program, which we call as adoption framework, that we run for the client in very close conjunction with the client. We don't do it all by ourselves, but we are the drivers who allow that process to happen smoothly.
Okay, brilliant. The next question is, what is your recommendations regarding application versioning, code, and design guidelines?
Okay, I think that's for you, Gopi.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Gopi here. Yeah, definitely. When it comes to application versioning, we are provisioning an asset in SharePoint Online. You can have it as a separate solution, and we have several instances now. We have this open source repositories, and GitHub is widely used for taking care of the application versioning side, where you can have you can fork, or you can have a branch for the different levels of changes the application goes through. And when it comes to guidelines, I would definitely feel we should strictly make sure all the web parts are now built against SharePoint framework, because going forward that is the framework which will be supported by Microsoft. And as we talk, there might be a few site templates where a communication site, when you build, you would obviously get a modern experience, and it is more user friendly, and it is responsive. Like, it helps to cater to any, I mean, it renders properly according to the device whatever we browse through. And when it comes to guidelines, yeah, definitely, like, make sure you don't touch the products scripting files, or the CSS files, make sure you're using the framework and using a GitHub like tool for storing your code will help. Yes, yeah.
Just to add to what Gopi just said, although we have started the SharePoint framework journey, and we have actually got some of our clients started by running a boot camp for them to get prepared for what is coming. But it we right now do not do a production application using SharePoint framework for the simple fact that it's still termed beta. And although it's a framework which is supposed to be standardized, internally there are changes that are being done to the feature. So we don't want to build something and then rebuild it as Microsoft changes things in the backend. So just a tip that you need to be ready, but take it slow and before you move it to production. But you need to definitely start thinking on those lines, and having that forward thinking would definitely help.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we are out of time and also out of questions. But if you do have a question that you just didn't get typed in, actually we have one more coming in. So we have 2 more minutes. We'll do the last question, and then if you do have a question you haven't already typed in, please go ahead and just wait for the follow-up emails, and then you can reply to that with your question, and Maarga will be able to answer that. So the last question is, does SHO support company branding, i.e. to have vendors self-serve by inputting data? I'm sorry, does SPO support company branding?
Yeah, yes, yes, it definitely supports branding, but there are certain areas, like where they specifically say you should not touch them. Like when we look at the top bar, where it renders all the other Office 365 applications. That is the area where they specifically say where you cannot apply the branding. But yes, I mean there are definitely ways to customize your SPO application for branding for a specific company.
Okay, brilliant. But there are certain areas that are
Yes.
off limits. Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, great. So we're done with the questions. Is there a slide for contact information?
Yes, Gopi, if you can move to the last slide. So if you have not shared any questions today and you have questions, you can write to us on the email ID or contact us.
Yeah, we'll have that slide up in just a moment.
Sure.
But while we're waiting for that slide to come up, so we do appreciate everyone who has attended today. We appreciate the questions and the feedback in the polls. And here is the contact information. So if you do have a question, you can just get that right over to the email there in the lower right-hand corner. And you can also reply to the webinar feedback. So there we go. So Chirag and Gopi, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll go from there, and we'll go ahead and terminate the session.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Gopi, for sharing all the insights today. I wanted to thank everybody who joined us today for this webinar, for spending time with us. We love doing this because we get a lot of perspective from the audience, as well as we get the opportunity to share our experiences. So we look forward to doing that more and keeping it more relevant to the topics of interest. So please do share your feedback, and if there are any experiences that we can gather from you, would be really looking forward to learn from you in terms of your challenges or roadmap for SharePoint. We love to just talk to people in this area. So feel free to connect with us. Thank you.
Excellent. Have a great day, everybody.